Simi Balogun had reached her breaking point, and 10 years of her mother's high society matchmaking was the limit. The senator's son, who spent 3 hours explaining the resale value of his Rolex? Check. The oil heir who genuinely didn't know how to boil an egg or use a microwave? Check. The real estate mogul who asked for her fertility records before the appetizer arrived? Double check. So, when her mother called from her Ikoyi mansion, singing, "Simi darling, I found him, a boy from a prestigious family, very successful, very handsome," Simi didn't argue. She decided on total sabotage. If she could embarrass her mother just once, the dates would finally stop. Her plan was foolproof. A lopsided 2,000 Naira market wig, a mustard yellow sweater with a massive coffee stain, and mismatched rubber flip-flops. She was going to look like a total fashion disaster in the middle of the most expensive restaurant in Lekki. The plan was perfect until she walked in and saw Tayo Ademola. He wasn't a flashy Lagos big boy. He was tall, grounded, and had the kind of observant, soulful eyes that belonged in one of her manga drawings. He was exactly the kind of man she'd dream of on the one day she decided to look like a mustard monster. This story is going to have you screaming, I promise. Hi everyone, I'm Omi, and welcome back to the channel. Today's tale is a wild ride from start to finish, but before we dive into the chaos, I have a question for all of you. If you showed up to a date looking like a total disaster just to scare a guy off, only to realize he was secretly a billionaire, would you stay for dessert or would you run out the door out of pure embarrassment? I need to know your move. Drop your answer in the comments below, and you might just see your name featured in my next video. Now, let's get into the story. The smell of expensive oud and the sharp clinking of crystal glasses always made Simi feel like she was suffocating. In the Balogun household, even the air felt like it cost a few $1,000s per breath. She sat at the edge of the sprawling marble kitchen island, picking at a plate of gourmet hors d'oeuvres that tasted more like paper than food, while her sisters, Kemi and Funke, engaged in their favorite competitive sport, luxury inventory. Honestly, Simi, that vintage look is starting to cross the line from starving artist to actual poverty, Kemi remarked, adjusting the strap of her ostrich skin Hermes bag. There's a private shopping event at the Alara boutique tomorrow. You should come. You can't keep showing up to family brunch looking like a graphic design project that went wrong. Funke laughed, not looking up from her phone as she swiped through photos of a senator's gala they had attended the night before. Don't bother, Kemi. She's probably saving her money for more of those Japanese comic books she hides under her bed. I saw your browser history on the shared iPad, Simi. Webtoons, really? You have a degree from a top UK university just to draw cartoons of people with purple hair? Simi didn't take the bait. She simply adjusted her glasses and took a sip of her water, her mind already miles away. In her head, she was currently sketching the layout for Chapter 52 of The Neon Samurai, her digital manga series. She could see the panel clearly, a high-contrast battle scene under the rain, the lines sharp and aggressive. On the internet, she wasn't the disappointing Balogun daughter. She was S-Inc., a creator with 3 million subscribers who hung on to every stroke of her digital pen. Her sister saw cartoons. She saw a world she had built with her own 2 hands, a world far more real than their manufactured social circles. She was just about to make her escape to her studio, a converted servant's quarter her mother hated, when the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Mrs. Balogun entered the room like a tropical storm draped in expensive lace. Her head wrap was a towering architectural feat of silk, and her jewelry clattered with the sound of old money and even older authority. Simi, thank God you haven't disappeared into that dark hole you call a room, her mother announced, her voice vibrating with a dangerous level of excitement. She didn't wait for a greeting before she began her practiced pitch.
I have just off the phone with Mrs. Ademola. You remember her? Her family owns half of the tech infrastructure in West Africa. Well, her son, Tayo, is back in Lagos. Simi felt the familiar weight of a headache beginning to form behind her eyes. Mom, please, not again. The last nice boy you found tried to explain to me why women shouldn't have bank accounts for spiritual reasons. This one is different, Mrs. Balogun insisted, waving her hand as if to brush away the memory of the previous 8 disasters. He's brilliant, Simi, very successful, very well-bred. He's the kind of man who can actually match your father's estate. No more excuses. I have already told her you would be at the restaurant in Lekki this Saturday at 7 p.m. It's an exclusive spot, very private. You will wear that green silk dress I bought you for your graduation. I have a deadline for a client on Saturday. Simi lied, her voice flat. The client can wait. Your biological clock cannot, her mother snapped, her tone shifting from sweet to steel in a heartbeat. You are 26, Simi. While your sisters are securing the Balogun legacy, you are wasting time with freelance nonsense. You will go on this date, you will be charming, and you will not talk about your drawings. Give this boy a chance to see a proper Balogun woman, not this rebel persona you've been wearing lately. Simi looked at her mother's determined face, then at her sister's smacking expressions. She knew the green silk dress. It was tight, itchy, and made her look like a high society trophy, exactly what Tayo Ademola would expect. If she went as the proper daughter, she'd be stuck in another 4-hour cycle of boredom, nodding along while some Lagos big boy bragged about his private jet and his father's connections. A slow, mischievous heat began to rise in her chest. She realized she had 2 choices. She could go as the perfect daughter and suffer, or she could go as the most spectacular version of herself her mother feared. Fine, Simi said, a small cryptic smile playing on her lips. I'll go. Saturday at 7 p.m. I won't cancel. Mrs. Balogun beamed, clapping her hands together. Excellent! I knew you'd see reason. I'll send the driver to pick you up at 6 p.m. No need, Mom, Simi said, standing up and finally making her move towards the door. I want to make sure I arrive, exactly as I intend to be seen. As she walked towards her room, she wasn't thinking about green silk. She was thinking about the lopsided synthetic wig she had seen at the Balogun's local market store last week. The one that looked like it had been through a car wash and lost. She thought about the oversized mustard sweater in the back of her closet with the permanent coffee stain on the sleeve. If Tayo Ademola wanted a prestigious girl from a good family, she was going to give him a night he would never forget. By the time she was done with him, the Ademola family would be the ones calling her mother to cancel all future engagements. Simi locked her door and sat down at her drawing tablet. The stylus felt heavy and powerful in her hand. She opened a blank canvas, but she didn't draw a samurai this time. She sketched a quick, messy caricature of a woman in a giant yellow sweater and a crooked wig. One last date, she whispered to the quiet room. Let's make it a masterpiece. The Saturday sun hung heavy and humid over Lagos, the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer and the patience of every driver on the 3rd mainland bridge wear thin. While the rest of the Balogun women were likely ensconced in the chilled sanctuary of a med spa or having their cuticles tended to by silent professionals, Simi was navigating the chaotic, rhythmic pulse of a local market far from the manicured lawns of Ikoyi. This was the heart of her mission. To truly ruin a date with a man like Tayo Ademola, one couldn't just look casual. In the world of Lagos high society, casual was still calculated. A $500 t-shirt and distressed jeans that cost more than a month's rent. No, to achieve total social annihilation, she had to become a visual migraine. The market air was a thick soup of dried fish, diesel exhaust, and the loud, melodious bargaining of traders. Simi moved through the narrow aisles with a sense of purpose she usually reserved for her manga storyboards. She pushed past a mountain of plastic basins and found herself at a stall draped in synthetic hair that glittered unnaturally under the sun. "Mommy, I need something special," Simi said, eyeing a row of mannequins that looked like they had seen better decades. The trader, a woman with a sharp eye and an even sharper tongue, pulled down a bob that was supposed to be chestnut brown but had a distinct, sickly greenish undertone. It was lopsided, the French cut at an aggressive, unintentional diagonal. "This one is 5,000 naira, my daughter. Human hair blend." Simi touched the fibers. They felt like a scrub brush. "It's perfect, but it's too expensive. Give me the one in the clearance box, the one nobody wants." 10 minutes later, Simi walked away with a 2,000 naira wig that looked like a bird had nested in it and then abandoned it in a hurry. It was stiff, smelled faintly of industrial plastic, and sat on her head with all the grace of a wet towel. She tucked it into her bag, a thrill of rebellion dancing in her chest. Next came the accessories. She bypassed the stalls selling genuine gold and silver, heading instead to a vendor whose display was a riot of cheap, clunky plastic. She found a pair of nerd glasses with frames so thick they looked like they were made of recycled tires. The lenses were non-prescription, which was perfect because they distorted her eyes just enough to make her look perpetually confused. She added a pair of mismatched rubber flip-flops, one a neon pink, the other a faded blue, that made a loud, obnoxious thwack-thwack sound with every step. Back in her studio, the transformation began. She pulled out the mustard monster, an oversized vintage sweater she'd found at a thrift shop months ago. It was a shade of yellow that complemented absolutely no skin tone on earth. She had spent the morning improving it, adding a fresh dark coffee stain right over the heart. She pulled on the mom jeans, high-waisted denim that was 3 sizes too big, cinched at the waist with a frayed piece of twine she'd found in the garage. She tucked the bulky sweater into the jeans, creating a silhouette that could only be described as unfortunate. Finally, she donned the wig. It sat lopsided, one side significantly longer than the other, obscuring her left eye. Simi stood before her full-length mirror and gasped. The artistic rebel was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she had been dressed by a windstorm in a donation bin. The thick glasses slid down her nose, and the wig gave her the appearance of someone who hadn't seen a comb since the turn of the century. "Perfect," she whispered, her voice muffled by the high collar of the sweater. She looked at her drawing tablet, where the character of the neon samurai watched her with fierce, disciplined eyes. "Sorry, Kenji. Tonight the pen is mightier than the sword, but the wig is mightier than them both." She could almost see her mother's face already. The horror, the silent scream, the frantic apologies to the Ademola family. She could imagine Tayo Ademola, probably dressed in some boring, expensive suit, looking for a Balogun beauty and finding this. She wouldn't just be a disappointment, she would be a legend of the Lagos dating scene. She would be the girl who broke the matchmaking machine. With a final satisfied adjustment of her crooked glasses, Simi grabbed her cracked phone and headed for the door. The mustard monster was ready for its debut.
The 5-star restaurant in Lekki was a fortress of glass, gold, and quiet judgment. As the valet opened the door, a wave of air-conditioned luxury hit Simi, smelling of imported lilies and the kind of wealth that didn't need to raise its voice. Simi took a deep breath, adjusted the lopsided weight of her 2,000 naira wig, and stepped inside, her mismatched flip-flops knocking a sharp, rhythmic thwack-thwack across the polished marble floor. The hostess, a woman whose ponytail was pulled so tight it looked like a surgical lift, froze. Her gaze traveled from Simi's crooked, tire-tread glasses down to the coffee-stained mustard monster sweater and finally settled on the twine holding up her oversized jeans. For a moment, the ambient jazz seemed to skip a beat. "Good evening," the hostess managed, her voice trembling with the effort of maintaining professional neutrality. "Are you delivering something?" "I'm here for a date," Ami announced, pushing her glasses up with a finger. She made sure to slouch, projecting the energy of someone who had recently given up on the concept of linear time. "Reservation for Ademola." The hostess blinked. Her eyes widened. "Table for two? Near the window?" She looked as if she were witnessing the end of civilization. "Follow me, please." Simi followed, enjoying the way conversations died as she passed. She was a walking glitch in the matrix of Lekki's elite. She saw a group of socialites, women who probably knew her sisters, drop their forks in unison. This was better than she had imagined. She was a visual tragedy, a Balogun nightmare, and by tomorrow, her mother would be too embarrassed to show her face at the yacht club. Then they reached the table. Simi had prepared herself for a Lagos big boy, someone with a gold watch thick enough to be a weapon, an ego to match, and a shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. She had her "I'm a struggling artist who hates capitalism" speech ready to fire. But the man who stood up to greet her was a complication. Tayo Ademola didn't look like he was trying to prove anything. He wore a simple white linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal lean, athletic forearms. He was tall, with a clean-shaven head and a neatly groomed beard that framed a jawline sharp enough to cut through her sabotage. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They weren't judgmental or shocked. They were deep, observant, and currently dancing with a spark of genuine suppressed amusement. "Simi Balogun?" he asked. His voice was a rich, low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the space between them. "The one and only," Simi replied, intentionally making her voice a bit nasal. She pulled out her chair before he could reach for it, the twine of her jeans snagging slightly on the velvet upholstery. She sat down with a heavy thud, letting her mismatched flip-flops dangle visible to the entire room. Tayo sat back down, his gaze lingering on the diagonal cut of her wig. He didn't flinch. He didn't look around the room to see who was watching. He simply looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were the most interesting thing he had seen all year. "I like the sweater," he said calmly, leaning forward. "That's a very specific shade of yellow. Is it vintage?" Simi narrowed her eyes behind her thick lenses, her BS detector ringing. Was he mocking her? "It's mustard sore, and the stain is a limited edition. It's from a very exclusive brand called I Don't Care." Tayo let out a soft, melodious laugh that caught her off guard. It wasn't the condescending chuckle of the men her mother usually finds. It was the sound of someone who genuinely enjoyed a good joke. "Fair enough," he said, picking up the menu. "I was told the Balogun daughters were known for their impeccable fashion sense. I have to admit, Simi, you've completely exceeded my expectations." Simi felt a blush creeping up her neck, which she quickly tried to hide by adjusting her wig, causing it to tilt even further to the left. This wasn't going to happen. He was supposed to be horrified. He was supposed to be looking for an exit strategy. Instead, he was looking at her like she was a masterpiece he was trying to decipher. "Your mother mentioned you went to school in the UK. But I have a feeling you spent more time in the underground galleries than the lecture halls. Am I right?" Simi stiffened. How did he do that? 1 minute in and he was already poking holes in her armor. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that Tayo Ademola wasn't a titan because of his bank account. He was a titan because he was completely, unnervingly present. "I spent my time doing what I wanted," she said, leaning back and crossing her arms, which usually involved avoiding people like the people in this room. "Then we have something in common," he said, a slow, conspiratorial smile spreading across his face. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Between you and me, I only agreed to this because my mother threatened to stage a protest in front of my office. I was expecting a 3-hour lecture on real estate and designer shoes. He looked at her coffee-stained sleeve and then back at her face. You have no idea how glad I am that you showed up in that sweater. Simi stared at him, her heart doing a strange, frantic acrobatic flip in her chest. This was a disaster, a total, absolute disaster. She had dressed like a troll to scare away a billionaire, but she had accidentally found the only man in Lagos who seemed to speak her language. Don't get too excited, she muttered, trying to regain control of the sabotage. I also haven't washed my hair in a week, and I'm planning to order the messiest thing on the menu. Tayo's grin only widened, a mischievous glint in his eyes. In that case, I hope you like garlic. I hear the escargot is particularly lethal tonight. The waiter arrived, hovering like a nervous moth around a very bright, very confusing flame. He held the gold-embossed menus with trembling hands, his eyes darting towards Simi's mismatched flip-flops, as if they might personally offend the lobster thermidor. Simi decided it was time to dial up the heat. If Tayo Ademola wasn't scared of a crooked wig, maybe he'd be scared of a girl who lacked any semblance of fine dining decorum. Everything here looks small, Simi announced, closing her menu with a snap that made a nearby diner jump. She leaned back, letting one of her blue flip-flops dangle off her toe with a rhythmic slap-slap against the velvet chair leg. I'm not really in the mood for deconstructed anything. I'm actually starving, like just finished a 12-hour shift at the construction site starving. Tayo watched her, his chin resting on his hand. He didn't look annoyed. He looked like a man watching a very high-stakes chess match. What did you have in mind? I want something real, not this Lekki grass, she said, gesturing vaguely at the elegant microgreens on a passing plate. She leaned in, her thick nerd glasses slipping down to the tip of her nose. I want Akara, and not the fancy kind they serve in hotels with truffle oil. I want the ones fried in a blackened pot by the roadside, served in a newspaper that's still oily enough to read the headlines through. She waited for the wince. She waited for him to check his watch and remember a sudden board meeting. Most men of his stature treated street food like a biological weapon, something you only discussed in the context of charity drives or poverty statistics. Instead, Tayo's eyes lit up with a hunger that had nothing to do with the 5-star menu. Are we talking about the woman under the bridge at Obalende or the one near the bus park in Yaba? Simi blinked, her slouch faltering for a split second. Yaba, obviously, her pepper sauce is actually lethal. Correct. But if you want the real gold, you go to Inyabose in Mushin, Tayo countered, his voice dropping into a tone of pure, unadulterated reverence. She uses a blend of 3 different peppers, and her pap is so smooth it's like silk. I used to sneak out of my office during my first startup year, just to stand in line for 20 minutes. My assistant thought I was having an affair. I told her I was, but with a bean cake. Simi stared. The mustard monster sweater felt suddenly very heavy. You eat at Mushin. Simi, I own restaurants, but I live for the street, Tayo said, a conspiratorial grin breaking across his face. He signaled the waiter over. We won't be ordering tonight. My friend and I have a more pressing engagement with some high-quality legumes. Before Simi could protest or even adjust her lopsided wig, Tayo had settled the cover charge with a casual wave of his hand and was leading her toward the exit. The hostess looked visibly relieved to see the coffee-stained sweater leaving her establishment, but Simi felt a mounting sense of panic. This was supposed to be the part where he ran away. Instead, he was opening the passenger door of a surprisingly modest, high-end sedan that smelled of cedar wood and expensive silence.
30 minutes later, the polished glass of Lekki had been replaced by the neon chaos of a bustling street corner. The air was thick with the scent of hot oil, frying onions, and the rhythmic shh of a metal ladle hitting a pot. They stood by the roadside, the billionaire in his white linen shirt and the artist rebel in her 2,000 naira wig. Tayo didn't just order. He engaged in a complex, high-level negotiation with the woman behind the pot, laughing as she teased him about being a big man who still remembered his roots. When the Akara arrived, tucked into a warm, grease-stained paper bag, Tayo didn't wait for a fork. He grabbed a steaming bean cake, blew on it twice, and popped it into his mouth, closing his eyes in a moment of pure bliss. "Try it," he urged, holding the bag out to her, "if you can handle the pepperattis." Simi took one, the heat seeping through her fingers. She bit into the crispy exterior, the fluffy, savory center melting on her tongue. It was perfect. It was exactly what she wanted, and she hated that he was the one to provide it. She looked at him, really looked at him as he leaned against the car, completely unbothered by the dust of the road or the stares of passers-by. "You're not what I expected," Simi admitted, the nasal voice she had been practicing finally dropping away. "Neither are you," Tayo replied, wiping a stray drop of oil from his thumb. He looked at her glasses, then at the lopsided wig, his gaze softening. "You've spent the whole night trying to convince me you're a disaster, Simi, but all I see is someone who is incredibly bored of being told who she's supposed to be." He took another Akara, offering her a half-smile that made her heart do a slow, dangerous roll. "So," Tayo said, tossing the empty paper bag into a nearby bin, "now that we've handled dinner, do you want to tell me about those manga drawings you hide from your mother, or should I keep pretending I don't know why your fingers are covered in digital pen calluses?"
The weeks that followed were a blurred montage of stolen hours and architectural contrasts. They fell into a rhythm that Simi jokingly dubbed the low-life tour, though secretly it was the most high-stakes game she had ever played. Simi maintained her mustard monster persona with a stubborn, fading conviction, occasionally swapping the stained sweater for thrift store flannels that smelt of mothballs and rebellion. Tayo, for his part, remained the unassuming titan, picking her up in the same modest sedan and taking her to hidden spots in Surulere and Yaba where the music was too loud and the plastic chairs were perpetually sticky. To Simi, Tayo was just an incredibly observant, surprisingly humble tech guy who probably spent his days fixing server errors or coding boring apps for small businesses. He was the only person who didn't look at her lopsided wig and see a cry for help. He saw a shield, and he respected it. She found herself relaxing around him, her witty barbs softening into genuine laughter, even as she guarded her biggest secret with the ferocity of a dragon. "So, what's the freelance project that has you looking like you haven't slept since the Buhari administration?" Tayo asked one evening. They were sitting on the trunk of his car, overlooking a quiet stretch of the lagoon, sharing a bottle of cold malt. Simi shifted, her fingers tracing the familiar hardened skin on her middle finger, the artist's colors. "Just some graphic design for a client, logos, branding, the usual boring stuff," she lied, the words tasting like ash. In reality, she was pulling 18-hour shifts to finish the mid-season finale of The Neon Samurai. Her webtoon was trending globally, and her inbox was a minefield of licensing offers and fan theories. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to show him the intricate panels where she'd hidden a character that looked suspiciously like him, a calm warrior with observant eyes. But the fear held her back. If she told him she was S-Inc., the artistic rebel mask would slip. She'd be a success, a brand, something her mother could finally market. To stay Simi, she had to stay struggling. "I get it," Tayo said, his voice a low hum against the sound of the water. "I have a few projects like that, a lot of back-end stuff. People see the interface, but they don't see the thousands of lines of code screaming in the background." Simi looked at him, the moonlight catching the sharp line of his profile. "Is that why you're so low-key, Tayo? You're a back-end kind of guy." He let out a short, cryptic laugh. "Something like that. I've spent a lot of time building things that other people get to put their names on. It's quieter that way. Less performance." He didn't mention the 3 floors of a glass skyscraper in Marina that bore the logo of Ademola Global. He didn't mention that the lines of code he oversaw moved billions of naira across the continent every single day, or that his face was currently on the drafts folder of 3 different business magazine covers. To Tayo, the world was full of people who wanted a piece of the fintech king. Around Simi, in her crooked glasses and paint-smudged fingers, he was just a man who liked street food and sharp wit. He wasn't hiding the money out of malice, he was hiding it for peace. They were 2 ghosts haunting their own lives, hiding their crowns behind thrift store denim and linen shirts. One afternoon, they sat in a crowded internet cafe in Sabo, Simi's territory. She was pretending to work on a logo while Tayo checked his emails. In reality, Simi was frantically sketching a background of a futuristic Lagos market, her stylus flying across the tablet hidden under a pile of old folders. Next to her, Tayo's phone buzzed incessantly with encrypted messages from his CFO about a merger in Nairobi. "You're doing it again," Tayo whispered, leaning over. Simi jumped, nearly knocking her mouth over. "What?" "That thing with your wrist, you move it like you're fighting someone. It's not logo design movement, Simi. It's too fluid, too expressive." Simi felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She looked down at her hidden tablet, then back at his deep, knowing eyes. For a second, she almost showed him. She almost opened the Webtoon app and said, "Look, this is me. This is my soul." But then Tayo's phone lit up with a call labeled Boardroom 1, and the moment shattered. He looked at the screen with a flicker of intense cold calculation that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual calm mask. "Sorry, client trouble. I should probably take this outside." "Go ahead," Simi said, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. "I have to finish this branding anyway." As he walked away, his posture shifting into that of a man who commanded empires, Simi watched him through the dusty window of the cafe. She realized that they were both living in the shadows of the people they were supposed to be. She was the ugly saboteur who was secretly a world-class creator, and he was the quiet tech guy who she was beginning to suspect held a lot more power than he let on. They were a perfect match of imperfect lies, and as Simi turned back to her glowing screen, adding a highlight to the eyes of her warrior hero, she wondered whose mask would be the first to crack. "Whatever happens," she whispered to the empty chair beside her, "I hope you like the warrior as much as the tech guy." The humid afternoon air in Yaba was thick with the scent of roasted corn and the cacophony of yellow Danfo buses screaming toward Fadei. Simi was in her element, perched on a plastic stool that wobbled dangerously every time she laughed. She was mid-bite into a piece of roasted plantain, her mustard monster sweater pushed up at the elbows, and her lopsided wig held in place by a prayer and a single bobby pin. Across from her, Tayo looked remarkably at home for a man who had spent his morning authorizing a multi-million-dollar currency hedge. He was meticulously peeling the charred skin off a piece of bolly, his eyes crinkled with the genuine warmth that only appeared when he was with her. "I'm telling you, Tayo, the proportions are everything," Simi said, waving a greasy finger for emphasis. "You can't just have the pepper, you need the salt to cut through the smoke. It's like character design, too much edge and nobody relates, too much sweetness and it's boring." Tayo smiled, leaning in. "And what about us? What's the proportion here? 1 part mystery, 2 parts sabotage, and a heavy serving of street food?" Before Simi could deliver a witty retort, the atmosphere shifted. The rhythmic chaos of the bus stop suddenly parted as a sleek, silver Range Rover, a vehicle that belonged in an Ikoyi showroom, not a Yaba gutter, screeched to a halt just inches from the bolly seller. Simi froze. She knew that specific shade of silver. She knew the way the tinted window rolled down, slowly, with the predatory grace of a shark. "Oluwa Simi Balogun." The voice was like a crystal glass shattering on marble. Mrs. Balogun stepped out of the car, her silk iro and buba shimmering in the harsh afternoon light. Behind her, a bodyguard stood ready to protect her from the mere idea of poverty. She stared at the scene before her, her youngest daughter, dressed like a visual hallucination, sitting on a cracked plastic stool, eating roadside food with a man in a plain black t-shirt. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Simi managed, her BS detector instantly hitting the red zone. "What am I doing here?" Mrs. Balogun's voice rose to a pitch that made the nearby hawker stop mid-shout. "Simi, look at you. You look like you've been evicted. And who is this?"
She turned her gaze toward Tayo, her eyes scanning him with the brutal efficiency of a high-end jeweler looking for flaws. Is this why you've been disappearing? For a boy who eats at a bus stop? Tayo started, his movements calm and measured. Good afternoon, ma. I'm Tayo. I did not ask for your name, young man, Mrs. Balogun snapped, her diamonds catching the sun as she gestured wildly. Simi, I arranged a date with an Ademola, a prince of industry, and instead you are here playing starving artist with a boy who clearly doesn't even own a proper iron for his shirt. Have you lost your mind? The shame. If your sisters see this, we are finished. The irony was so thick Simi could have choked on it. She looked at Tayo, expecting him to be mortified, but he was watching her mother with a strange clinical detachment. At that exact moment, Tayo's phone, the one he usually kept face down, erupted with a series of urgent pings. Because Tayo was standing so close to the Range Rover, 3 men in dark, sharp suits suddenly stepped out from a black SUV that had been idling across the street. These were Tayo's senior board members, men who had been following him in a separate car for a mobile briefing they were desperate to finish. Sir, the oldest of the men said, stepping toward Tayo and ignoring the shouting woman in silk. The Nairobi merger, the regulators are pushing back on the fintech license. We need a decision now. The board is waiting on the Zoom link. Mrs. Balogun stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. She looked at the sharp-suited men, then at the black SUV, then back at Tayo. Sir? Board? What is going on here? Tayo sighed, the unassuming Titan mask slipping just enough for the fintech king to peek through. He looked at the board member, then at Simi, his expression full of a quiet apology. Give me 5 minutes, Segun. Wait in the car. But, sir, you're eating by the road, Segun stammered, looking at the charred plantain in Tayo's hand as if it were an alien artifact. The investors in London will have a fit if they hear the CEO is making billion-dollar calls from a bus stop in Yaba.
The billion hit the humid air like a physical weight. Simi felt the world tilt. She looked at Tayo, really looked at him, and saw the way the board members hovered, waiting for his word. She saw the way her mother's expression shifted from disgust to a terrifying predatory calculation. CEO? Mrs. Balogun whispered, her eyes widening as she realized she might have just insulted the very prince of industry she had been hunting. Ademola, you are the Tayo Ademola? Tayo didn't look at Mrs. Balogun. He looked only at Simi. Simi, I can explain. Explain what? Simi asked, her voice trembling. The mustard sweater felt like it was shrinking, suffocating her. That you were researching me? That this was all some big joke to see how the poor artist lives? No, it wasn't like that. Tayo reached out, but Simi stepped back, her mismatched flip-flops hitting the dusty pavement. Simi, darling, Mrs. Balogun chirped, her voice suddenly dripping with honey. Oh, Mr. Ademola, please forgive my outburst. I was just so worried about my daughter's safety in this vibrant neighborhood. Be quiet, Mom, Simi said, her heart breaking into a million jagged pieces. She looked at Tayo, the man who knew her favorite pepper sauce, the man who had seen her lopsided wig and didn't laugh. He wasn't just a tech guy. He was the king of the world she hated. He was the very thing she had been trying to sabotage. You lied to me, Simi whispered. You lied too, Simi, Tayo countered gently, gestured to her wig. We both did. I lied to protect my soul, Simi slapped, tears stinging behind her thick glasses. You lied because you could. There's a difference. She didn't wait for his answer. She turned and ran, the thwack of her mismatched flip-flops echoing against the roar of the Yaba traffic. Behind her, she heard her mother calling her name and the board members murmuring about market optics, but all Simi could think about was the charred plantain left on the plastic stool, a small, honest thing crushed under the weight of too many secrets. The following week was a blur of ink, pixels, and the kind of silence that only exists when you've blocked a billionaire's phone number. Simi had retreated to her studio, trading the mustard monster for a pair of paint-stained joggers and the glowing light of her drawing tablet. She threw herself into the season finale of the Neon Samurai with a frantic, broken energy. Every stroke of her stylus was an exorcism.
She drew her warrior hero with a jawline a little too sharp and eyes a little too observant, then deleted the layer in a fit of pique, only to redraw it again at 3 in the morning. She was prepared to stay in her creative cave forever, but the world and her agent had other plans. "Simi, wake up, it happened," her agent had screamed over the phone 3 days after the Yaba disaster. A global tech conglomerate, Vanguard Africa, had made an astronomical bid to license her manga for an exclusive animated series and a dedicated app. It was the kind of deal that changed lives, the kind that meant she would never have to hear about Hermes bags or proper husbands again. The launch party was held at a rooftop gallery in Victoria Island, a space so sleek and modern it made Simi feel like she was walking inside one of her own futuristic drawings. This time, there was no wig, there was no coffee stain. Simi wore a structured, jet black jumpsuit that made her look like the high-end creator she actually was. Her natural hair was styled in a sharp, tapered cut, and her real glasses, thin, elegant frames, sat perched on her nose. She looked powerful, successful, and utterly miserable. Her mother was there, of course, vibrating with the smugness that could power the Lagos power grid. "I always knew my Simi was a genius," she told a circle of dazzled socialites, conveniently forgetting the decade she'd spent calling Simi's art a waste of a good degree. Simi ignored her, keeping her eyes on the large digital screens displaying her character designs. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming over the ambient lounge music. "To officially launch the partnership between Sync and our parent company, please welcome the man who made this vision possible, the CEO of the Ademola Group and founder of Vanguard, Mr. Tayo Ademola." The room went silent, then erupted into applause. Simi felt the floor tilt beneath her. She watched as a man stepped onto the stage, and for a second, she didn't recognize him. This wasn't the guy who ate bully by the roadside or wore plain black t-shirts. This was the Titan. Tayo was dressed in a charcoal grey suit that was so perfectly tailored, it looked like it had been sculptured onto his swimmer's build. He moved with a calm, predatory grace that commanded the entire room. He looked every bit the billionaire the world knew him to be, powerful, distant, and untouchable. But as he reached the microphone, his eyes didn't sweep the room. They went straight to the corner where Simi stood, and the coldness in his gaze vanished, replaced by a vulnerability that only she could see. "When I first encountered the work of Sync, I didn't just see beautiful art. I saw a soul that refused to be put in a box. I saw a creator who understood that truth is often found in the messy, unpolished corners of our lives." He paused, his gaze locking onto Simi's. The crowd was hanging on every word, but he was talking only to her. "For a long time, I thought I had to hide who I was to find something real. I thought that if I stripped away the suit and the title, I could find someone who saw the man behind the bank account. What I didn't realize was that I was sitting across from someone who was doing the exact same thing." A murmur went through the crowd as Tayo stepped down from the podium, ignoring the photographers and the dignitaries. He walked straight towards Simi, the sea of Lagos elite parting for him like the Red Sea. He stopped a foot away from her, the scent of cedarwood and expensive success hitting her like a wave. "You look incredible," he whispered, his eyes scanning her face. "But I have to admit, I kind of miss the mustard yellow." Simi felt the anger she'd been nursing for a week start to dissolve, replaced by a stubborn, aching heat. "You bought my company, Tayo? That was your big move? To literally own my work?" "I didn't buy you, Simi. I invested in a genius," he countered, his voice low and urgent. "The licensing deal was negotiated by my board months ago, before I even knew Simi Balogun and Sync were the same person. When I realized it was you, I didn't stop it. Not because I wanted to own you, but because I wanted the world to see you exactly the way I did that first night in Lekki, as a masterpiece." Simi looked at him, the billionaire in the suit, and at the digital screen behind him showing her warrior hero. She realized that in her manga, the hero always had a secret identity, a mask he wore to protect what mattered most. Tayo hadn't been mocking her, he had been a mirror. "You are still an idiot for lying," she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "And you are still a rebel with a crooked wig in her handbag," he teased, a small, hopeful smile playing on his lips. "Can we start over? No masks, no board members, no mustard monsters unless you really want to." Simi looked at his extended hand, then at her mother who was watching them with an expression of pure, unadulterated greed. She looked back at Tayo and realized that for the first time in her life, she didn't need a disguise to be free. Only if we split the bill for the lunch dinner and I get to choose the spot. There is a place in Obalende that makes the best suya you've ever had. Tayo's laugh was the most beautiful thing in the room. Lead the way, Sink. I'm starving.
The rooftop gallery was a masterpiece of cold aesthetics, but for Simi, the air felt like it was charged with static. Even as Tayo stood before her, looking every bit the unassuming titan, now fully revealed, she couldn't shake the sensation that her life had been turned into a boardroom strategy. She ignored the curious glances of the Lagos elite and the frantic whispering of her mother nearby, instead gesturing toward a secluded balcony that overlooked the glittering, chaotic sprawl of the city. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the smooth lounge music, and not as CEO and artist, as people. Tayo followed her into the humid night air, the heavy scent of the lagoon mixing with the faint aroma of expensive perfume. He leaned against the glass railing, the moonlight catching the charcoal silk of his suit. "I know that look, Simi. You feel like I've been playing the game." "Haven't you?" Simi rounded on him, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "For weeks, I thought I was dating a guy who understood what it was like to struggle, to be overlooked, to have to build something from nothing. I let you into my world. I showed you the grit and the grease and the back end of my life. And all the while, you were sitting on a throne, watching me like I was some social experiment." It wasn't an experiment, Tayo countered, his calm demeanor finally cracking. For the first time, he sounded desperate. "Simi, every time I picked you up in that sedan, I felt like I was finally breathing. In my world, everyone is wearing a mask. Everyone wants a contract, a favor, or a headline. You were the only person who looked at me and didn't see a dollar sign. You saw a guy who liked pepper sauce and bad jokes." "But you let me believe you were someone else," Simi raised, her frustration she'd been bottling up finally spilling over. "You let me think we were on equal footing. Do you have any idea how patronizing it feels to realize that while I was worrying about my freelance deadlines, you were probably making more in a minute than I make in a year? You weren't just a tech guy, Tayo. You were the gatekeeper, and you kept the gate closed until it was convenient for your brand to open it." Tayo took a step toward her, his expression darkening with a shared pain. "And what about you, Simi? You talk about honesty, but you showed up to our first date looking like a mustard monster on purpose. You wore a wig you bought at a market stall just to prove a point about how superficial you thought I'd be. You hid your success as S-Inc. because you were afraid that if I knew you were a genius, I'd be just like your mother, someone who wanted to market you." "I did it to protect myself," she snapped. "And so did I." Tayo stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "We were both hiding, Simi. You hid behind ugly to find a man who wasn't shallow, and I hid behind ordinary to find a woman who wasn't a gold digger. We both used masks as shields. The difference is I fell in love with the woman behind your shield before I even knew she had one." The word love hung in the air, vibrating between them like a live wire. Simi looked away, her gaze landing on the digital billboard in the distance, where a trailer for the Neon Samurai was playing on a loop. "I hated the idea of being a Balogun wife," she whispered, her voice losing its edge. "I thought that if I was successful, I'd just be another asset for my family to trade. I wanted to be loved for the messy, unpolished version of me, the version that draws in the dark and eats boli at the bus stop." "And I loved that version," Tayo said softly, reaching out to tentatively touch her hand, the artist's callus against the billionaire's skin. She realized that the argument wasn't about money or status. It was about the fear of being truly seen. They both had been so busy sabotaging the expectations of others that they had nearly sabotaged each other. "It's going to be a disaster, you know," Simi said, a small, wary smile finally touching her lips. "My mother is already planning the wedding colors. She thinks she's won." Tayo let out a low, relieved laugh, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Let her plan. We'll just show up in mismatched flip-flops and eat Akara at the reception. I hear the mustard monster look is making a comeback." Simi laughed, the sound bright and real against the backdrop of the city. "Don't push your luck, Ademola. You still owe me an apology for that board meeting at the bus stop."
I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, he promised, pulling her closer as the static between them finally settled into a perfect, honest hum.
The heavy, humid air of Lagos night felt different this time. It felt like freedom. There were no silver Range Rovers lurking in the shadows, no board members trailing behind in black SUVs, and certainly no lopsided 2,000 Naira wigs. Simi sat on the same wobbly plastic stool at the Yaba bus stop, her black jumpsuit from the Gala replaced by a simple, oversized white tee and her favorite pair of well-worn jeans. Her natural hair was free, and her real glasses sat securely on the bridge of her nose. Beside her, Tayo looked less like a titan and more like the man she had fallen for. He had ditched the charcoal suit for a plain cotton shirt, the top buttons undone, looking entirely relaxed despite the chaotic roar of the traffic around them. The fintech king was currently haggling with the Akara seller over the exact level of crispiness required for their batch, a debate he was taking as seriously as a merger. I'm telling you, ma, if it's not brown like a mahogany desk, Simi won't eat it, Tayo teased, glancing back at her with a wink. The woman behind the pot cackled, dropping more bean batter into the bubbling oil. Ah, so you finally brought the real girl back. This one is much finer than that one with the confused hair from last time. Simi laughed, a sound that felt light and unburdened. See, even the street knows my fashion sense was a tragedy, Tayo. When the paper bag was finally handed over, heavy and translucent with oil, they didn't head for the car. They walked a few paces to the edge of the sidewalk, leaning against a concrete pillar beneath the flickering amber glow of a street lamp. They ate in a comfortable, rhythmic silence at first, the heat of the akara warming their hands as the spice hit their tongues. It was the real deal. No pretense, no high society performance, just two people sharing a meal in the heart of the city that had tried so hard to label them. So, Tayo said, wiping a speck of oil from his lip, the deal is signed. The neon samurai is going global. How does it feel to be the most famous woman in Lagos who isn't married to a senator? Simi looked out at the sea of headlights. It feels solid. For the first time, my mother isn't talking about who I should marry. She's talking about brand partnerships. It's still annoying, but at least now she's afraid of my lawyers. She nudged him with her elbow. And you, is the fintech king allowed to eat at bus stops now that the secret is out? Tayo leaned his head back against the pillar, looking up at the smog-tinted stars. The board still hates it. My PR team says it makes me look unpredictable. But honestly, I've never been more certain of anything. I spent so long building a fortress around my life that I forgot how to live in the streets that built me. You reminded me that the Titan is just a job. This is the man. He turned to her, his gaze softening. There was no mask left, just the deep, observant eyes that had seen through her mustard monster disguise from the very beginning. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you sooner. I was so used to people seeing the money first that I didn't realize you were the one who wouldn't care. Simi reached out, her fingers ink-stained as always, finding his. And I'm sorry I tried so hard to make you hate me. I was so busy fighting my family's idea of a perfect life that I almost missed the perfect man. She squeezed his hand. No more wigs, Tayo. No more tech guy stories. No more secrets, he promised, pulling her closer. As the buses thundered past and the city hummed with its restless, beautiful energy, the manga artist and the billionaire stood together on a dusty street corner. They were two rebels who had finally stopped fighting the world and started choosing each other. Simi took one last bite of her akara, leaned her head on Tayo's shoulder, and smiled. The sabotage was over, and for once, the reality was better than any story she could have ever drawn.